Okay, so our learning is Lila Nishmas Mindel Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain her Nisham Shav Aliyah. We are jumping into a whole discussion about the laws about Hanukkah. Okay, we're going to learn some history of Hanukkah, some laws of Hanukkah, fascinating stuff. So we are at the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph Amar Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna. Yeah, you see that? 2 dots. Amar Rav Huna. Psilos u'shmanim amar chachamim, regarding the wicks and the oil that our sages said, Eim alikim hem b'Shabbos. Chazal said you cannot use them for lighting on Shabbos. Similarly, Eim alikim hem b'Chanukah. You're also not allowed to use those wicks or oil for Chanukah. Bein b'Shabbos, bein b'chol. Okay, this is true both on Shabbos and during the weekday. Okay, now we'll see there are 3 different opinions about this. Okay, so Amar Rava, my time to Rav Huna. So Rava comes along and explains why Rav Huna asers, why he forbids using the wicks and oils both during the week and on Shabbos. Kasavar, because he holds of 2 things. 1, kavsa zakukla, that if the Chanukah light gets extinguished, then you're obligated to relight it, okay? And therefore, during the week, if you use a bad one, oil or wick, the concern is I might light the Hanukkah candles and get so stuck in my game of dreidel that I'm not going to relight it. So if kavsa zakukla, if I'm obligated, we'll see that's a matter of disputes. Meaning there's going to be some who say that once I light, I don't have to deal with it, right? But according to this opinion, it says I light, I have to deal with it. So there's a concern that I might not deal with it. And since we're talking, so therefore you should not use these lousy wicks or oil. And then B, he also holds mutal shamish l'ora, that you're allowed to use the Hanukkah lights for benefit. And therefore that explains why he says on Shabbos you can't use these things, because on Shabbos I'm going to be sitting there, if according to this opinion, it says I'm allowed to use the Hanukkah lights for my own benefits, which as we know we don't pass in that way. But if I do hold that way, then if I'm sitting there and I'm learning, I'm reading a book, or I'm learning next to my Hanukkah candles, and it gets extinguished, there's a concern that I'm going to mess around with it and touch it on Shabbos. And that explains why Rav Huna holds that both the oil and the wick cannot be used on both on Shabbos. The oil and wick cannot be used on Shabbos, and the oil and wicks that we've been discussing in the Mishnah, which are of inferior quality, they cannot be used both on Shabbos and during the week. Rav Chisda Amar.
The last part, the Mutra Shamish,
yeah,
saying that this is why on Shabbos you can't use it.
Correct.
It's only going on Shabbos.
Correct. The first thing, kafsa zakukla, again, is the weekday. Meaning the main thing, the point is that since I am obligated to relight it, and I might get distracted. Therefore, that's explaining why during the weekday you cannot. That's explaining why during the weekday you cannot use the inferior lights. And on Shabbos, the reason you can't use it is because the fact that I'm going to be reading next to it. It goes out, and there's a concern I might start playing with it, and I'd be Michal Shabbos. Okay. Opinion number 2. Rav Chisda Amar Malikim Bechol. I am allowed to use them during the week. I have a lo b'Shabbos, but I can't do it on Shabbos. So what's the rationale? It makes sense now. Kisavar, he holds kavsa ein zakukla. He holds that if it goes out, it's not my problem. He holds once I light the candles, if it goes out a second later, I fulfill my mitzvah. And that's why he holds during the week. Okay, so I lit with inferior quality, it goes out, and I get distracted, it's fine, I still fulfill my mitzvah, so it's not a problem. That's why he holds during the week, I am allowed to use inferior oil and wick. However, he holds mutalish shamish l'ora, he holds that you are allowed to use its lights, you're allowed to benefit from its lights, and therefore, there's going to be a concern on Shabbos. On Shabbos, granted that halachically for the Ner Chanukah, I fulfill my obligation, but I'm going to be reading a book next to those candles, and they're going to go out, and I'm going to make a mistake and go and light it, and therefore I cannot use inferior lights on Shabbos. But during the week, Rav Chisda holds his mutter. And here's opinion number 3. Amar Rav Zera, Amar Mastav, Amar La, Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav. Psilos Ushmanim Amar Chachamim, regarding the wicks and oil, Eim Alikim b'Shabbos, that regarding the wicks and oils that we said you're not allowed to use them on Shabbos, Malikim hem b'Chanukah, you're allowed to light with them on Chanukah, Bein b'Chol, Bein b'Shabbos. Right, there's the opposite extreme. He holds you're allowed to use inferior wicks and oil on Shabbos and during the week. Why? I'm Rav Yirmiyah, my time at Rav. What's the reason of Rav? Kisavar, he holds kavsein zakugla. So first of all, he holds that if it gets extinguished, you do not have to relight. Okay, and that explains why during the week I'm allowed to use inferior lights. Because what's the worst thing that can happen? I light it lit, and then I get distracted and it goes out. Who cares? Once I lit it, kavsa, if it goes out, in zakukla, it's not my responsibility. And B, also it's forbidden for me to use the Hanukkah candles. I'm not allowed to have any anah from it. And therefore on Shabbos, I will not be using it to read my book. And therefore, if it goes out on Shabbos, I'm not going to by mistake go ahead and rekindle it, because I'm not using it on Shabbos for personal light. Okay? Fine, those are the 3 opinions, and now the Gemara continues. The Chazal, the rabbis who were learning with Abaye told him this pshat. They told him this explanation of Rav Yirmiyah, who was explaining Rav. V'lo kibla, and he didn't accept it. He didn't believe that was the real reason. He thought there must be something else. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, it was said in the name of Rav Yochanan. In other words, Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael where Rav Yochanan lived, and now this explanation was given in the name of Rav Yochanan. Amar, and he said v'kibla. And then Abaye eventually, meaning he came to a point where he did accept it. In other words, sometimes you have a question and you're trying to figure out what the reason is, and someone gives you a reason, it doesn't resonate. And then maybe later on you revisit it, you tried a bunch of other reasons, didn't fit, and now it did resonate. So eventually, years later, whenever it was, he now heard this same explanation in the name of Yochanan years later, and he now accepted it. Amar, and he commented, Izakai gemir l'shmaita mikara. He said, had I been worthy, I would have learned this, I would have accepted it initially. In other words, the first time I was taught this, I would have accepted this. Asked the Gemara of Hagamra. At the end of the day, he learns it. Who cares? Learns it today, learns it tomorrow, learns it a week from now. He knows the right pshat. What's the difference? Answers the Gemara, nafkamina girsa diyankasa. What an important idea. And the difference is that girsa diyankasa means the things you learn when you are young. I think we could go around the room and all share things that we learned, when we were in like third grade, that we probably know better than we learned, last week. There's something about learning with a fresh, young mind that it sticks, right? They say if you want to learn a language, you want to learn instruments, most people, you got to start young, right? Our young mind is much fresher, and therefore by saying, yeah, it's true. I learned it today, and ultimately I know the right pshat, right? But the point is that had he learned when he was younger, it would be much more embedded. It would be something which he would know much better, and that's why he's lamenting the fact that he didn't learn this as he was younger. Okay? Now the Gemara is going to analyze this idea again. So we saw a machlokes over here of whether or not when it gets extinguished, if I have to deal with it or not, right? One opinion said that kavsa zakugla, if it gets extinguished, I am obligated to relight it. Another opinion said kavsa ein zakugla, if it gets extinguished, I am not obligated to relight it. So the Gemara is going to question that second opinion. The kavsa ein zakugla, is it true? They're both Rav and Chisda hold that if it becomes extinguished right away or whatever, before the shear, before the amount of time, you're not obligated to relight it. Reminu. We have contradictions to that idea from a brisa. The brisa says, mitzvasa mishateshka chama. The mitzvah begins at sunset, and it goes at shetichla regel min hashuk until the people, literally the feet, the passerbys are no longer in the market. Okay, that's the lashon of the brisa. The brisa says that the mitzvah goes from sunset until people are no longer in the marketplace. My love, does this not imply di kavsa that if it goes out in between those two times, meaning the simple read of the Mishnah is that you have to light it at sunset and it has to be lit until people are no longer in the market, right? So isn't the implication di kavsa if it goes out hadar madlikla? The purpose of this teaching is to tell you that if it goes out, you should be obligated to relight it. That's the Gemara's premise. So the emphasis is low. The Gemara says no. What's the brisa coming to teach you? Di'ilo adlik madlik. It's teaching us that if I did not light it, that's the time period that I'm allowed to light the candles. In other words, when it said from sunset to when the people no longer are walking outside, is it telling me that my light has to be lit throughout that entire time? Or is it telling me the time to light? That I should light either from sunset, and if I don't light at sunset, I'm able to light until people are no longer walking in the market. Right? You see those two ways to read the brisa? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Avinami, alternatively, what it could become to teach us is Lishiura, is tell us not when to light and not how long it should stay lit, but rather how much oil you have to put into the candle. In other words, it's telling us that there's an amount of time that from sunset until people are no longer in the markets, and you have to make sure there's enough oil that it could light during that time. However, if it goes out, maybe it's okay, right? Meaning the opinion that says kavsa ein zakugla would say that, yeah, granted, I have to put enough oil that it lasts from sunset until that time. Okay, and as many poskim say, that's a half hour, let's say, according to many poskim. But if it goes out before that, I still fulfill my mitzvah. I still fulfill my obligation. Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
So I know we just discussed the portion about whether we have to relight or not, but this is probably because for our purposes, we poskim like the third opinion, right? Which is that you can't use the light. But
Sorry, one more time?
We say that you can't use the light. Right? That's
Laura, yeah.
The first two opinions say that we can. It seems like we're not getting into that, and that seems more surprising.
Why we're not? You're asking why we're not analyzing the opinions?
Because we don't go by. The third opinion is the one that we poskim like, but it seems interesting to me that.
But the Gemara over here is not. The Gemara is just to clarify. The Gemara is not getting into Hana right now. The Gemara is getting to Kafsa Zakuk or Ein Zakukla. Meaning there's two principles that are there.
We said, so that's why you can't use it when it comes to Shabbos, right? I'm going back to before.
Yeah.
That seems like we're that's stranger that the two first opinions say that you can use, why would they say you can use the light?
Why would you say you can't use light?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We're not getting into that.
We're not getting to that machlokas at all right now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Why not?
Why, yes.
So why are we getting into?
Okay, I mean that's a question to ask all the time. Your premise is okay. So since you're asking, since I know that the poskim go with the opinion that says that asur l'shtamish la'ora, why doesn't the Gemara analyze it? I'm not sure if that's a fair question. Like Gemara, I mean, there's certain things the Gemara feels the need to analyze, certain things it doesn't. The reason we paskin that way is because the fact that it's quoted by Rav and the fact that Rav Yochanan goes that way is the reason that we ultimately paskin that way. But I think there's nothing left to say. I would just point out it's a chiddush. It's a tremendous chiddush that I can't use the light of the Hanukkah candles. Where does it even come from? Right? Meaning the Rishonim discussed like. What's the like why would you even say this such a thing? You know, you can't. It's like right. You can't go backwards. Like, oh, how do they not know that? What do you mean? How do they know that? Why? This premise is that why would you think you can't use the Hanukkah candles? You use Shabbos candles. Why can't you use Hanukkah candles? So they say, one shot is like it's similar to the menorah, and there's it's idea of me'ilah. You can't use the menorah in the Beis Mikdash. I mean, in other words, you can't have benefits from the lights of the menorah in the Beis Mikdash. In the sense that you can't have benefit from things that belong to Kodesh, and therefore similarly you can't have benefit over here. I think the other Rishonim talk about the fact that people seeing you use reading by those candles will not recognize that it's done for Hanukkah, and by Hanukkah dafka it's pursuing Nisa. It's not about like Shabbos candles about having light in the house. It's a practical thing, whereas Hanukkah candles is about showing people about the miracle. If I see you standing by the window and I'm reading a book next to my Hanukkah candles, I will not know that it's being done for Hanukkah candles. That's all. Both these things are novel. Okay, but let's go further. We got to run. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. So until there's no longer people in the market. How long is that? Until the Tarmodayans have vanished. Who are the Tarmodayans? They're the people who sold firewood. At the end of the day, people come home. It's cold. They need to buy firewood. It's in the winter, and therefore they're the last people in the market. They're the ones who are doing the last sales, and so that's the idea. So two practical things come out of this. One is this idea of tichla regel mashuk. Nowadays, most folks can say doesn't apply because now, meaning that even though in the earlier source they speak about you have a certain amount of time to light, you miss it, too late. Nowadays, people are driving on our streets all hours of the day, and therefore, bottom line is, if you live in a normal city, you live in Baltimore, you could light until any time. You could light until any time. If earlier the better. But you could light until any time. Halach l'maisa. But you do need enough oil that it lasts for a half hour past nightfall. Okay, that's based on a whole big machlokas Rishonim and Achronim over here. But so it has to be, you have to make sure it lasts for a half hour past nightfall. That's the bottom line. Okay, with that. If it goes out, we do hold Ein Zakukla, but it's ideal. Yes, correct. We do hold Kafsa Ein Zakukla. You do not have to relight, which is, to Max's non-points, but implicit point, that your implicit point is that we're discussing Kafsa Ein Zakukla. We do hold Kafsa Ein Zakukla, because right, we unpack that piece. We do hold of that. Kafsa Ein Zakukla, you don't have to relight it. However, the poskim say it's ideal to relight it if you can. Okay, says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa says, Mitzvahs Chanukah ner ishu beso. The main halacha is that there's one candle has to be lit for each house. V'mahadrin, and those who are mahadrin, those who go further in their mitzvahs, they light a candle for each person in the house. On day one, you light 8. Okay, according to Beisham, you go down. You light 1. As you go on, you light more. Probably one of the most famous machlokim to Beisham V'Hillel, going up or going down. There is machlokas Amoraim in the west, meaning in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Yossi bar Rav Yossi bar Zvida Chad Amar Tamid Beishamai. And they were debating what the rationale is behind these different opinions. According to one said the time of Beishamai, the reason behind Beishamai was Keneged Yom Machnasin, regarding the days that are yet to come. I'll come back to that in a second. Time of Beis Hillel, the reason behind Beis Hillel is Keneged Yom Yotzin, according to the days that have already passed. Okay, so what's V'chad Amar? Let's just read on. Time of Beis Shammai Keneged Pari Hachag, that Beis Shammai who holds that you go down is corresponding to the bulls of Sukkot. Why in the world is Sukkot connected to Hanukkah? We'll come back to also. Beis Hillel holds that we go up in holiness and we do not go down in holiness. Therefore, we start with 1. We have this idea that we always progress. We always recognize the world is progressing in holiness, even if we don't see it, we don't feel it. The world is always progressing in holiness, and we light the Hanukkah candles corresponding to that. So what's going on over here? So according to Beis Hillel, let's go to the first reason. The first reason, Beis Hillel is very straightforward. He says we're going as the miracle gets greater, we light more candles, right? So that that makes sense. Beis Shammai, who says we're going down, about if it's corresponding to the days, the miracles, why are we going down? So it's Ben Yoyada, the Meiri, I forgot who says. Sorry if I don't remember, but basically one of the Rishonim say that the reason is that really on day one was actually the greatest miracle, because if you think about it, there's in the flask was enough oil to last for 8 days. So divide the flask. That means that on day one, the 1/8 of that flask. So that means that over the course of 8 days, 1/8 was doing each day. So on day one, that actually was the greatest miracle, because 1/8 lasted. Basically on day one, you had the great 1/8 of it was. Oh, 1 second, I'm getting confused. 1 second. Why was day one the most? On day one, the 1/8 was. Okay, that's going to come back to me. We're going to have to keep on running. Hopefully remember at the end of this year. If not, tomorrow you're going to this year, you'll tell us. Okay, what's it called? So, but I'm completely blanking. Okay, but bottom line is there's an explanation to say that because it's divided into eighths, therefore. Okay, fine. Therefore, on day one is the bigger miracle. The Shammai connection to Sukkot is much more difficult. There are historians who argue that they missed Sukkot that year while they were fighting the Yevanim. The base of English was closed, and therefore, actually, we spoke about this in the past. They actually, in the book of Maccabees, they talk about the fact that they were celebrating on Hanukkah with lulavim. It describes them walking around with lulavim, walking around. It almost sounds like, and some historians argue that they were almost like making up for Hanukkah making up for Sukkot on Hanukkah. Okay. 8 days, fine. Okay, fine. Amar Rav Yochanan. Shnei Zkenim hay b'Tzidon. There are 2 elders in Sidon. Echad osik Beis Shammai, v'echad osik B'divrei Beis Hillel. One did like Shammai, one did like Beis Hillel. Zenos and Tam Levarim connected Be'er Har Chag. One explained he did like Beis Shammai, like the bulls of the Sukkot Yom Tov, which again go down in number. Zenos and Tam Levarim. This one explained, saying to Malan and Kodesh Meridin, we go up and we do not go down regarding holy things. Tana Rabbanan. Ner Chanukah mitzvah nichal Pesach Beso mibachutz. The mitzvah is to place it outside. By the doorway. Okay, if a person lived in an attic, or rather an upper floor, and they don't have a place outside, like they don't have a doorway outside by the floor, by the outdoors. Manicha bechalon asbichlo shesram. You place it in a window that's adjacent to the public domain. It's a very important thing that people sometimes miss, and that is like it's sometimes nice to light the Hanukkah candles in a room that is everyone could gather and sit around and sing next to. But the most important window is the one that's connected to Shesarabim. So in some houses that's your dining room or living room, great. Some houses that's your kitchen or even a bedroom. That's the one you have to light by, right? Even if it's not the most convenient or picturesque place, the point is you have to light by the window that is adjacent to Rosh Hashanah that the most people could see, and it's important to keep in mind. Uvishasa sakana, however, in times of danger, b'nichal shulchan v'dayu, a person placed it inside, and that is enough. Okay, and so interestingly, we light still inside, even though we do not live. I could argue, but we could certainly there'd be no like real risk of lighting outside. And it's interesting. We find this in a couple of places. Not the time to unpack this, but there's a couple of places where this notion of shas sakana kicks in. So, for example, blowing the shofar that we do it at Musaf comes from Shas Sakana. It says during dangerous times they weren't able to light earlier; they had to push it off because the government was there, whatever. And basically, therefore, we would light. They would blow shofar at Musaf. And now, what do? We blow shofar at Musaf and we blow Shachris. Haftorah also, right? Haftorah is instituted because they didn't let them learn. Okay, they didn't let them read the Torah, so they were instituted of Torah, and then we ended up like kind of keeping that institution, even though we no longer are in a place of danger. Something to think about. I'll say very briefly because it's a beautiful idea. Rav Tzadok says that Hashem dafka put in a sakana, put in this difficult situation because He wanted a more. So when He wanted something, wanted a change. I mean, with Hanukkah it's a little more tenuous, but with shofar and with Haftorah, God wanted, it wasn't enough. God, as we grew in our spirituality as a people, God wanted shofar not just at Shachris, He wanted more shofar. So therefore, it was at Musaf too. So we can't go back because basically God dafka put us through this difficult time, so that we'll have not just this shofar, also this shofar, not just Torah reading, but also Haftorah. So it would be silly to go back because the whole point, and it's meant to be like a personal lesson as well, in the sense that when there are these the point is that these difficult and challenging times are meant to expand us, not to just like get past it. Okay, now we revert back to the difficult, to who we were yesterday. But when we go through as a people, as individuals, these difficult times, the point is to expand us, not to take us down. Okay, Amar Rava, tzarach nerach eretz l'shamash la'ora. Rava says you need another candle to use its light. Okay, in other words, what we call shamish. In other words, you can't, and here, Max, to your points, We paskin, you're not allowed to you have hana, and therefore Rava now is coming along and telling us, since you can't have hana, you need to have another candle, because at the end of the day, especially back in the day when it didn't have a lot of light, and therefore you're going to have a menorah, people are going to be using its light, and therefore you need to have another candle, so that you're using the other candle's light. Ika medura lotzark, but if there's a bonfire in the room, meaning what we would call lights on in the room, in other words, other strong lights, then you don't have to. Just skip a word. Ika medura lotzark, you don't have to, okay? V'adam chashavu, and if it's an important person, apparently important people would not use the light of a torch back in the day. They would only use a candle. It's like disrespectful, okay? Alpha gav dika medura, even though there is a large fire, tzarch ner cheres, you still need a shamish because people are not going to use the bonfire. Technically speaking, nowadays we probably don't need a shamish because we have lights on. It's a silly, probably foreignly influenced thing of like turning off the lights and allowing the room to be dark, and just the Hanukkah candles, very picturesque, but tricky. You really don't want to be using the lights. You really need to have the light on, but especially nowadays you have the lights on, probably don't really need the shamish, but whatever, the minhag is to use the shamish, and there's a lot of mystical reasons behind the shamish, but technically speaking, we don't need it. My Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? Okay, classic Gemara, right? So we've been talking about Hanukkah for an Amud, and now I ask, hey, what are we talking about? What's Hanukkah? Okay, Tana Rabbanan. We learned in the Brayso Yomi Hanukkah. On 25th of Kislev is the days of Hanukkah. Tzmani Ino, there are 8 days. Delola Mispad B'lahen V'lola Hasanosman. You can't have a eulogy. You can't fast. Shenichnasu Yavanim Lehichal. When the Yavanim went into the sanctuary, Timo is called Shmanash Vehechal. They made tameh. They defiled all the oil in the base of English. Gavar Malchus Beis Chashmonai V'Nitzchum. When the Chashmonaim overcame them, but they did not find. They only found one flask of oil, which had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. Only had enough to kindle for one day. Now there was a nace that happened. Ligo ben Shmona and lived for 8 days. The Shana Cheres, the next year, the post can have the commentators have a good time with this. Like, why not that year? The year after, Kavum v'asum Yom Tov, they made it into Yom Tov, the Halal v'hoda, a Yom Tov of saying Halal and Thanksgiving. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Tanar Rabbanan. We have a brisa. Gates hayotze mitachas hapadish v'yotz v'hizik. A spark flies out from under a hammer of a blacksmith and damage someone else. Chayiv, you're chayiv. Where do we learn this? Bava Kama, right? This is in the Psalms, right? Gamal Sham Pishtan, Wabrishas Ram, a camel. So what's the idea? The idea is that the person's irresponsible. In other words, you're the blacksmith. You have to be very careful. You have to know the fact that you have the ability to damage, and therefore the blacksmith is chayav if his spark goes down and lights something on fire. Another case where an owner is irresponsible. Gamal Shatam Pishtan Overbrishas Ram. A camel is packed up with flax and passing through the public domain. And there's so much flax on the back of the camel that it protrudes into the store, and it gets on Vidal Kabiner Shal Chanvani, and the light, meaning keep in mind they just had fire. There was light. It lit on fire. Vihilik is abira, and it set up, lit up a house on fire. Balagamal Chayav, the owner of the camel, is Chayav, right? Because of the fact that he did something wrong, he was not responsible. However, if the light is outside, not inside, then Chanvani Chayav. Then the storekeeper is Chayav. In other words, if the light is inside, the storekeeper is Pater, the owner of the camel is Chayav. If the light is outside, then it's the owner of the store is Chayav. However, if you don't remember Chanukah Pater, when it comes to the case of Chanukah lights, then he is not Chayav. Okay, the Gemara is going to try to make an inference, but it's going to reject it. It must be, based on Yehuda's statement, that he is Pater. It must be that Ner Chanukah, you are obligated to place within 10 tefachim from the ground. Why? If you hold, you could place your Ner Chanukah nice and high, right? Then leimalei, then the one who is damaged could say to the shopkeeper, right? Rabbi Yehuda said, you're pater by Ner Chanukah. Why are you pater? Because you have to put it outside. But if you're allowed to actually put it really high, then you should and the fact that he didn't put it high, then the Baal HaChanus, the store owner, should once again be chayav. The fact that we don't say that implies that it must be, you cannot put it higher than 10 tvachim. V'dilma, answers the Gemara rejects this, V'dilma imitrucha leituva, asay lemnuim mitzvah. Maybe it's not obligatory to put it within 10, it's just that we say we allow him to put it lower, because we make it too difficult. We tell the store owner, the only way, that in order to avoid, the potential that something goes wrong, you have to go ahead and put it really high. He's not going to put it up, right? It's going to be too hard. So not that it's obligated to put it under 10, but rather you're allowed to put it up 10. And the Gemara leaves it unresolved. The Maisa, the post can do possibly the first opinion that Ner Chanukah mitzvah, you do have to put it within 10 tefachim. And okay, we'll come back and Max will take over tomorrow. Have a great day.